The FBI says that these girls were on their way to Syria, recruited by ISIS. Friends of the girls in the Cherry Creek School District noticed concerning tweets, alerted the district, and the district then called the home of the girls. That resulted in a search, and the district believes the FBI became involved just in time.
They are devoted to their cause. They believe they are anointed by their God, and they have no doubt that killing someone as publicly and brutally as possible will change the world, including their own countries, their friends, their family, the innocents. We have to come to some hard conclusion about stopping homegrown terrorists. Let's welcome to MidPoint the president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and the author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, also a former lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser joins us today. Doctor, thank you so much for being here today.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Doctor, we see a soundbite coming into this segment that talks about 15-year-old girls in Colorado who are leaving to join ISIS. We hear stories almost every day about the possibility of someone being a homegrown terrorist, and now they are facing this in Canada as well, somebody they knew to be a potential danger to citizens. Are we simply doing enough of a good job? Are we doing enough to try and find them, to understand them, and to root them out before they kill somebody?
We are not even close to doing enough. Why? Because the Muslim community has really not been engaged in countering the ideology that creates these monsters. We are still doing a whack-a-mole program where we're dealing with that final step, where right before they are going to commit an act of violence or join ISIS as active members, that's when we find them, and really Homeland Security is doing that. The continuum of radicalization starts long before, where they get pulled into this Islamo-patriotism, where they feel an allegiance to the jihadist movement, the Islamic State, or not only that Islamic State, but all Islamic states against the West, against the secular nation state of America, of Canada, of those states that aren't based in Islamic law. So that rupture, separation of Islamo-patriotism versus American nationalism is where we as Muslims need to be countering the ideology, and we're not doing that. There's very little programs. Our organization has some programs for that, but we're not being engaged by government, media, or other entities.
When you talk about not being engaged by other entities, let me ask a very simple question then. Are members of the Muslim community then, whether it be Canada, the United States, or anybody else, simply too scared to speak up?
Well, certainly there's some fear, but compare that to what our families are suffering in Syria and Egypt and elsewhere. I mean, that's nonsense. We have a responsibility to protect our country. And the only way to do that right now, the narrative is, well, the problem's terrorism. It's about violence, and it's combating violent extremism, whatever that means. We need to actually counter it much earlier, is that we have to have programs. Our Muslim Liberty Project is about countering Islamism, which is really the Cold War of the 21st century, is political Islam. And unfortunately, nobody wants to talk about the real problem. It's sort of like trying to counter drunk driving and ignoring the alcoholism, which is political Islam and this ideology. And too many of our leadership, it's not only fear, too many of the leaders in our community are actually apologists and part of this brotherhood network, the Islamists, that really believe the Islamic State is supreme.
Who's part of, excuse me just a moment, I have to ask this, who's part of the, who's making these apologies then?
Well, the apologies, let me give you an example. There was a letter to Baghdadi written by so-called moderates. It's lettertobaghdadi.com, the head of ISIS. They told him, well, your jihad is wrong, your the method of what you're doing, but the caliphate is necessary for Muslims, but we have to do it right in a moderate, democratic way. Well, I, as an American, find that abhorrent. There's no moderate way to do an Islamic theocratic state. So these are imams of major mosques, the Islamic Society of North America, the Council on American Islamic Relations. These are offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood Network from the 60s and 70s that the Holy Land Foundation trial said is part of the Islamist movement. And we as Muslims can easily tell. In the Middle East, there's a struggle going on between the Islamists and the non-Islamists.
Dr. Jasser, here in America, let me ask, I only got about 40 seconds left. We're going to take a break here, come back and talk more. But what you're saying right here, are we then as a government, America, Canada, other investigative agencies, are we just being then too soft on all of these groups? Are we letting them get away with it by not putting the hammer down and trying to find out who is in these groups that might kill us?
Absolutely. We're too soft. We're not lighting a fire under the feet of Muslims to say you have to counter this ideology. and we're giving them a pass, and the president's giving speeches saying, well, they're just not Islamic. Well, we can't have the debate if they say we're not Islamic, and we need to have that debate. All
right, now we're going to have that debate on a little bit more here because we're going to take a break. After the break, we'll talk about all that, plus how Canada is dealing with terrorism on their ground and putting together the fight with America, because obviously what happens in each country now is going to affect each other in this fight against homegrown and other radicalized terrorists. Later on this hour, the Houston mayor who stirred up a pastoral hornet's nest from the pulpit. It's coming up right here on MidPoint.